take the next 90 minutes and talk about GCP for medical devices. Now, when we look, and I'm an auditor, so when we go out and we audit, we often see that many medical device sponsors are still relying on ICH E6 in their protocols, and they say that they're going to follow ICH E6, which is great, right? It's a good scientific and ethical standard for how we interact with human research participants when we are studying investigational products, primarily as outlined in ICH E6 drugs. But we also have ISO 14155 for us, which is GCP for medical devices. Even though we have both of those, and maybe because we have both of them, we still see where companies are using both of them, even to fill in some of those gaps that we might see from a GCP perspective. So as we go through this, we're going to talk about some of those key differences and how they overlap and really provide that level of protection to make sure that we're getting good data from protected people in clinical research. Now, because ISO 14155 is a licensed product or product that you have to purchase, we're not able to share that, but we're sharing information about ISO 14155 and comparing it and contrasting it to ICH E6. So what we'll talk about are the purpose and governing bodies of ICH and ISO. We'll look at the core principles of each document. And as we mentioned, talk about any marked similarities and key differences. We'll also talk about additional resources of information that relate to the compliant conduct and oversight of medical device studies. We do find, particularly when we go out and look at IRBs and others, that there still is kind of a misunderstanding, if you will, of how device studies need to be conducted and overseen. Even though they're not substantially different in terms of the ethical parameters and requirements than we would have for a drug or biologic study, there are specific nuances that we need to be mindful of, and that's what we're going to discuss. So ISO is a worldwide federation of national standards bodies. So the U.S. is part of the ISO membership. ISO 14155 used to be in two parts, and it was basically combined into one in 2011. And it was adopted as an American national standard for information that we can use to support the conduct and oversight of medical device studies. So the clinical investigation of medical devices for human subjects, good clinical practice, is how ISO 14155 is properly titled. It's an international standard that addresses good clinical practice for how we design, conduct, record, and report clinical investigations carried out in a human subject population while using an investigational product as a medical device as that investigational product. So you'll see some similarities in the language from ICH E6, scientific ethical standards for how we conduct research in a human subject population. But of course, that key difference there is that ISO speaks specifically to medical devices. The ISO standard specifies that we are to protect the right, safety, and well-being of human subjects. We have to ensure the scientific conduct of the clinical investigation as well as the credibility of the results of that investigation. Responsibilities for sponsors and investigators also need to be defined. We need to use this document to assist sponsors, investigators, ethics committees, and regulatory authorities and other bodies involved in assessing the conformity of these investigational products to meet the standards put forth in the regulatory applications and in the protocols. So it's really a document, but it is a system of overlapping and interconnected requirements for use and making sure that we meet the requirements for GCP. So from an ethical standpoint, clinical investigations shall be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. If you're familiar at all with ICH E6, you will see a lot of this information is very similar, if not exact. These principles protect the right, safety, and well-being of participants, which are the most important considerations and shall prevail over the interests of science and society. So again, same wording. And the whole point is that regardless of investigational product type, we're working and interacting with this human research subject population, and we have certain requirements for meeting those standards. The principles shall be understood, observed, and applied at every step of the clinical investigation, which we'll see these themes repeated again.